competitiveness is obviously a top agenda for firms, for politicians, for the media, also for economists. But for whatever reason, my impression is that the debate is constantly being reduced to cost competitiveness. The very question, what is competitiveness, is really hard. Because in some paper I've read that there's nearly as many definitions on competitiveness as there are publications on the work. It's basically based on assumptions, what has to be done to be competitive, and what is competitiveness is again based on assumptions. Let's take a look at what is well-being before we bring those two aspects of productivity and well-being together. What is well-being is probably even harder to define than what is competitiveness. So I'm going to just show you a few examples of how it's operationalized. So for example, income inequality, poverty, etc. Resource efficiency, that's some indicators that describe beyond GDP goals. And what we see is that obviously there's a nice correlation between the two measures here. So apparently there is some link between high productivity and high subjective well-being. But what we see is that there is some dispersion. And I've highlighted two countries to see that this obviously doesn't work everywhere, or it's just one aspect of well-being. By the way, Vasco is the diamond on the top right of the red Spanish region. So relatively high level of life satisfaction and a relatively high level of productivity compared to the Spanish regions. We find very different patterns. In Spain, there seems no relation between productivity and air pollution. And in Germany, we find a positive relation. So there are regions that are more productive are those that have a higher level of air pollution on average. We have to admit that if we only take a look at productivity, we have only a very limited idea of whether this productivity is achieved at the expense of certain groups of the population or at the expense of future generations if we think of environmental outcomes. What we think is, what we need is, we need to switch from an input-oriented evaluation of productivity. We should switch from this perspective to an outcome-oriented evaluation. So what the starting point for our approach was that, well, productivity is not the ultimate goal of the society. Rather, the ultimate goal that should be followed by politicians is to enable high standards of living. So we should take a look rather at competitiveness measures that reflect the standards of living. Let's now turn to this approach that we've taken to measure competitiveness. We call this index the Index on Competitiveness and New Perspective Outcomes. Outcome focus and the new perspective, social inclusion and environmental sustainability. And I will refer to this new perspective outcomes as MPO. 3 pillars for this total MPO index: the income, the social and the ecological pillar. And what we do in the second step is we also create indices on potential drivers that might explain changes in the level of this competitiveness index. From my perspective and from what I've tried to show you is that competitiveness can be an important concept to evaluate how regions are doing if it is well defined. But after all, the question is, at least as a proxy for competitiveness, what about productivity? Is it a proxy that we can use for a quick assessment of competitiveness? What we think is that it's important to continue to think of and work on outcome-oriented competitiveness, and we have to explicitly include environmental outcomes in addition to well-being outcomes. Otherwise, we have no idea whether competitiveness is achieved not only at the expense of certain groups of the population now, but also at the expense of future generations.